Sandwalker recruits mocked a fragile human cadet. Then she became the Death Maiden in 1 hour. They mocked her the moment she stepped off the ship. A human cadet, small, fragile, silent, walking into a war zone ruled by towering alien elites. They call her dead weight. A joke, a species not worth the armor she wore. But within 1 hour, that same girl would earn a name whispered in fear across the galaxy: Death Maiden. This is the story of Mira Solas, a soldier who never raised her voice, but changed everything with her silence. Abandoned in live combat, ignored by command, forged by fire. What she did in 60 minutes shattered centuries of intergalactic protocol. And she never asked for recognition. She just survived, then kept surviving until they had no choice but to follow. If you're new here, subscribe now to join us for more jaw-dropping HFY sci-fi stories that turn underdogs into legends. Leave a like to support the channel, and drop a comment. What would you have done in Mira's place? As the recruits lined up under the twin suns of Sandwalker 4, Mira said nothing, but she was watching, measuring, and by the end of the day, they would all remember her not as a cadet, but as something far more dangerous. The drop ship pierced the atmosphere of Sandwalker 4, fire trailing behind like a warning shot to the ground below. Inside, Mira Solas gripped the straps across her chest, heart racing beneath polished but untested armor. Her human frame was smaller than every other being seated around her, towering lizards, crystal-skin hunters, floating bioentities pulsing with light. No one spoke to her. They only stared. Some sneered. Others laughed. In the corner, a group of Sandwalker recruits mimicked a human limp, whispering slurs that translated loosely to meatbag with eyes. Mira said nothing. She had prepared for this. Her silence wasn't fear. It was calculation. When the ship landed, the recruits spilled onto the desert floor in perfect formation. Mira followed, boots sinking slightly into the scorched red soil. The sky was gray with smoke from a recent skirmish. Dust cut across the horizon like a veil. Commander Tark awaited at the gates of the fortress, arms crossed, eyes scanning. His reptilian face remained unreadable until it landed on Mira. A click of his tongue, a flick of disdain. So, the Terran cadet survives launch. Let's see how long you last on your feet. Laughter echoed behind her, but Mira's gaze never left his. The base itself was brutalist, carved from stone and alloy, buzzing with drones and voices in alien dialects. Mira received her standard-issue locker assignment and was led into the barracks. The lights buzzed overhead. Her sleeping pod was smaller than the rest, positioned beneath a vent that spewed cold air intermittently. As she unpacked, a Sandwalker tossed a shredded towel toward her feet. "Wipe off your fragility," he hissed. Mira picked it up, folded it, and stored it without a word. Every action was a test. Every breath, a battlefield. This wasn't just training. It was a crucible designed to break souls. She had no intention of being one of them. That night, in the dining hall, trays clattered and languages clashed. Mira sat alone. Kaoru, the only Ederiano in the cohort, watched her from across the room. His kind rarely spoke aloud, but their golden eyes saw deeply. While others mocked her posture or lack of combat stories, he studied her hands, calm, steady, waiting. Mira ate slowly, chewing each bite like it was the last moment of peace she would know. Above them, a screen replayed archival footage of fallen humans in training. The room laughed in rhythm. Mira never looked up. She already knew what they thought of her. It didn't matter. She wasn't here to convince them with words. Morning came with a screeching siren and an announcement in 6 languages. Training day 1. Mira suited up, heart pacing faster than her footsteps. On the field, Commander Comet addressed them. "Today, you'll be tested beyond what your species deems moral or sane. Only the adaptable survive Sandwalker protocol." His eyes landed on Mira once more. "That includes you, flesh child." The group snickered. One recruit dropped to all fours in mockery, pretending to crawl. Mira stood firm, unmoved, her hands behind her back. Kaoru raised a brow, but said nothing. The test hadn't begun yet, but Mira's resolve was already on display. The first task was a 50-meter sprint under artificial gravity fluctuation. Most recruits staggered. Mira collapsed midway, her body spasming under the weight. Comet smirked. Perhaps Earth forgot to evolve bones. Later, in the obstacle maze, she mistimed a jump and landed hard, arm bleeding through her sleeve. Recruits whispered bets on how long until she cried. She didn't. When ordered to scale the sonic wall, she slipped twice but reached the top. At each station, Mira failed, but she always stood again. The pain didn't break her, it clarified her. In every stumble, she learned how the Sandwalkers thought, and more importantly, how to beat them. That evening, Mira sat on the floor of her barracks, wrapping her arm with a torn sleeve. Her body ached. Her lungs were raw from the atmosphere, but her eyes were clear. Kaoru approached, silently placing a protein ration beside her. Most would have quit by now, he said, voice soft and musical. She looked up, unsure if this was kindness or curiosity. "I'm not Most," she answered. "I came to stay." It was the first time she had spoken aloud since landing. Kaoru nodded, a silent pact forming between outcasts. Somewhere deep in the base, an alert light flickered. Something stirred beyond routine. Back in the command center, Comet reviewed footage of the day. He replayed Mira's stumbles, rewound her climb, paused at her eyes, burning with something not even his military instincts could categorize. "Too stubborn to die," he muttered. One of his aides asked if they should mark her for reassignment. Comet waved him off. No, let the desert finish what Earth couldn't. But something inside him twisted, a rare discomfort. He had underestimated soldiers before. Some lived long enough to become legends. He wouldn't admit it, but she reminded him of one. And legends always started with failure. That night, as Mira drifted asleep, the Sandwalker base trembled faintly, barely noticeable. A seismic shift registered as noise, but not threat. Outside her barracks, a black sky cracked with violet lightning. In her dream, she saw herself alone in the desert, facing creatures without form, carrying a weapon forged from her own spine. She awoke with a gasp, not fear, readiness. Somewhere out there, her proving ground waited. She rose, tied her boots again. There was no room for hesitation on Sandwalker 4. Tomorrow was not a promise. It was a challenge. The second day began with sirens, not drills, but the real thing. The lights in the barracks stuttered as Mira snapped awake. Outside, boots pounded the metal floors and alien voices yelled over the intercom. Live assault simulation has escalated. Combat rules engaged. Mira didn't hesitate. She threw on her gear and joined the flood of recruits rushing toward the perimeter. The air crackled with the smell of plasma and burning rock. Explosions thundered in the distance, no longer from programmed munitions. This wasn't training anymore. Something had gone wrong. Horribly wrong. On the field, chaos reigned. Smoke masked the horizon, and creatures not listed in any cadet manual poured through breach barriers. Their shapes were fluid, their weapons organic, and their roars untranslatable. Mira gripped her assigned carbine, standard issue, unfamiliar weight. Around her, seasoned cadets hesitated or screamed. One Sandwalker shouted at her to fall back. She didn't. Ahead, a downed cadet bled from the chest, calling out in panic. Mira ran, not away, but toward him, with laser bursts slashing the ground at her feet. She dove into the line of fire and dragged him behind a scorched barricade. Her muscles screamed, but her hands didn't shake. Commander Comet watched from the surveillance deck. "That girl again," he muttered. Beside him, analysts scanned heat signatures. The field splitting. Recruits are scattering. No cohesion. Comet leaned in. Let them scatter. This is where we find who's real. Mira wasn't on the main grid anymore. She'd been pushed past the tracking boundary during the retreat. A red dot blinked on the edge of the map. One life form, alone, moving deeper into the combat zone. No orders. No backup. Just instinct. "She'll last another 5 minutes," someone said. Comet didn't respond. Part of him wanted to believe that. But something about the way she ran. Mira crouched behind a broken hull, scanning for movement. Her HUD flickered. No connection to command. Static everywhere. Her breath steamed inside the helmet. She heard movement, then saw it. A beast-like invader pinning a cadet to the ground, preparing to finish him. Without thinking, Mira moved. 3 precise shots, one to distract, one to disable, one to kill. The creature dropped. The cadet, wide-eyed and alien, looked up at her like she was something unrecognizable. "Human," he whispered. She didn't answer. She was already moving, rifle raised, vision narrowing to targets and angles. She didn't feel like a cadet anymore. Elsewhere, Kaoru was pinned down by enemy fire with 2 wounded recruits beside him. He reached out psychically for help, but got nothing. No one was near. Then, without warning, a plasma burst exploded nearby, and out of the smoke came Mira. Her armor was cracked, face bleeding from shrapnel, but her grip on the rifle was surgical. She slid beside him, taking out 3 enemies in under 10 seconds. Kaoru looked at her in disbelief. "I thought you were gone." Mira only responded by tossing him a fresh energy clip. "Don't die today," she said. "Not while I'm still standing." Back in the command room, Comet paced as footage rolled in from scavenged drones. One blurry clip caught his attention. Mira executing a series of flanks and fire drops with impossible precision for a recruit. "How is she improvising like that?" someone asked. "She's human," Comet replied, almost bitterly. "Unpredictable, irrational, dangerous." The rest of the room fell quiet. Mira's path through the battlefield wasn't just reactive. It was surgical, deliberate, calculated, and she was doing it without orders. Comet couldn't decide whether to be impressed or terrified, but he knew one thing. She was no longer being tested. She was rewriting the test. By the end of the first hour, Mira had lost count of how many enemies she had neutralized. Her body moved on instinct, her mind sharp with terrifying clarity. The battlefield, though chaotic, started to make sense, like a puzzle she'd been unconsciously solving. She moved through broken supply units and collapsed barracks like she belonged there. She passed a mirror panel cracked on the floor. In its reflection, she didn't see fear or exhaustion. She saw command. She saw purpose. The girl who landed in silence had bled into something new, and the battlefield recognized it. Even the enemy began to retreat from her position. Mira finally reached a collapsed tower and took cover. She reloaded, breath shallow, wounds burning. She pulled a communicator from a fallen officer and tried to patch into the main network. Static, then partial signal. "Unknown unit, report." A voice crackled. Mira spoke her name, but before she could finish, the comm shorted again. She looked out over the battlefield. She could see the base in the distance, but there were hostiles between her and it. She had a choice: wait and hope someone finds her, or move again through enemy lines. She tightened her grip on the rifle. Waiting wasn't her style. She moved. With each step, the silence between gunshots grew longer, not because the fight was over, but because she was winning. Mira didn't fight like the others. She didn't posture. She didn't panic. She eliminated. One target, then the next. Calculated. Quiet. Intentional. As the sun dipped below the cliffs, casting Sandwalker 4 in cold shadow, she stood alone amidst the wreckage. Bloodied. Breathing. Still human. But something inside had shifted. She was no longer fragile. No longer the cadet mocked on day 1. The desert hadn't broken her. It had revealed her, and the battlefield now whispered her name. The official combat logs later showed it clearly. Mira Solas registered her first confirmed kill 2 minutes after the real assault began. A camera embedded in a downed drone recorded her crouching low, scanning for movement. Her eyes were sharp and her breath controlled. She spotted the enemy, a biomechanical invader clawing through a fallen recruit's chest plate. Mira fired 3 shots. 1 missed. 1 staggered the target. The third found the weak point at the base of the skull. The creature collapsed. The recruit gasped alive. "You saved me," he said. She didn't reply. She was already turning, rifle lifted, scanning for more. Back at command, Comet replayed the footage in silence. No ceremony, no victory cheer. He fast-forwarded past the kill, watching Mira's posture, movement, and choice of cover. He frowned. She moves like someone with field experience. he said. An aide checked her records. This is her first deployment. Kamatha's fingers tapped the screen. Then Earth lied. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the answer. Earth hadn't lied. They had sent a girl. And the desert had awakened something no file could predict. He didn't like it. Control was slipping, and nothing unnerved him more than variables he couldn't read. Across the ravaged zone, Mira moved like vapor, appearing behind barricades, firing, disappearing again. Her armor was marked with ash and acid burns. She was bleeding from her shoulder, but it didn't matter in one skirmish. She leapt onto a broken tank tread and used the height to snipe an enemy group preparing to flank survivors. Her accuracy was uncanny. As the last target fell, Kaoru's voice came through on her comms. "They're retreating from your side. What are you doing?" Mira paused, breathing heavy, finishing what they started. That was the first time Kaoru heard her sound like something more than human. In the barracks, the remaining recruits huddled, rewatching the combat feeds from salvage drones. They watched Mira, just one among them yesterday, dominate wave after wave of enemy forces. The silence in the room was louder than the combat footage. No one mocked her now. Even the loudest Sandwalker bully looked pale. "She's still out there?" one muttered. Kaoru nodded. "Alone." Someone whispered a name under their breath. "Death Maiden." The words weren't official. Not yet, but they echoed across the barracks like prophecy. A name born not from rank or birth, but from fire, blood, and refusal to die. Mira passed a field of scorched remains. Enemies she didn't even remember killing. Her body ached. Her mouth was dry. Her helmet's display blinked red warnings about oxygen and pulse levels. Still, she moved. A blast shook the earth behind her, toppling a comms tower. Without hesitating, she ran toward it, under the rubble. A trapped recruit screamed for help. Mira didn't flinch. She heaved twisted steel with wounded arms, dragging him free before the wreckage collapsed further. He coughed, stunned. Why come back for me?" She stared at him. "Because no one came back for me." Then she left him behind to get to higher ground. From atop a fractured storage platform, she scanned the base perimeter. Enemy forces were retreating in irregular patterns. Mira noticed something the analysts hadn't. They weren't retreating from the base. They were retreating from her. She was the center of the pattern. She had become the threat. She clicked her rifle's safety off, took a knee, and waited. When the next wave approached, she didn't wait for them to get close. She initiated the assault herself. Her shots landed before their growls reached her ears. She moved down the slope like a force of nature, and the name whispered in the barracks became legend. Within an hour, Mira had taken down more confirmed enemies than any other cadet in the operation. When her comms finally connected command again, the feed was unstable. "Unknown unit, identify," came a crackling voice. Mira replied calmly, "Cadet Mira Solas." The line went silent. Then status? She looked around. Smoke, wreckage, silence, area clear. They didn't believe her until the drones confirmed it. Kama stared at the data, expression unreadable. She cleared the quadrant alone. An aide asked. "No," he muttered. She didn't clear it. She claimed it. As the emergency evac teams rolled out, Mira refused extraction. She stayed behind to secure one last perimeter. Alone, standing among enemy bodies and broken weapons. She waited for the sun to fall. The heat faded. Cold crept in. She removed her helmet. Her face was cut and bruised, but her eyes were steel. The drone above captured the image. That frame, her standing against a ruined skyline, silent, unsmiling, will become a myth among recruits. Not staged, not edited. Pure, unfiltered defiance. Mira didn't pose. She didn't plan it. She just stood. The battlefield made her, and now it recognized its maker. By nightfall, a patrol unit finally retrieved her. The transport door opened, and the recruits inside went silent. Mira stepped in, dripping with dirt and blood, but upright. No swagger. No gloating. Just presence. One recruit whispered to another, "That's her, the Death Maiden." Mira looked up sharply. "Say it again, and I'll show you what she did." A smirk almost appeared on her lips. but faded fast. She sat leaned back and closed her eyes. As the doors sealed and the transport lifted off, every soldier knew one thing. Nothing would be the same again, especially not her. The transport that picked up Mira returned to base without her. No one saw her disembark. No log showed her movements. No visuals marked her return. When recruits asked, officers simply said, "She didn't make it." The atmosphere in the barracks turned solemn. Kaoru, silent and pale, stared at the empty bunk. She was gone. The last feed from her helmet had cut out after her final transmission. Area, clear. The phrase now echoed like a ghost story. Whispers spread. Maybe she bled out after extraction. Maybe the enemy circled back. Maybe she chose the desert over coming home. Legends always vanish in silence. In the surveillance room, Cometh reviewed Mira's last calm bursts. Nothing clear, just a flicker of her face before blackout. Cut, bloodied, unwavering. "You're telling me no one's seen her?" he demanded. No heat signatures, no biometrics? The text confirmed. Nothing. Then scan again. Cometh snapped. Used the satellite grid. Despite his disdain, a part of him needed confirmation. He didn't like gaps in data, especially not ones that wore a human face and rewrote protocol. And yet, beneath his frustration, he knew Mira Solas had become a variable that systems couldn't track, and variables like her always return when least expected. That night, the barracks were silent. Kaoru wandered the training field, now empty under twin moons. He crouched near the place she last stood, where her boots had kicked dust into the air. He whispered a word in Eteriano that meant unfinished. As he stood, a tremor rattled the ground. The gates to the west perimeter creaked open. A silhouette appeared, small, limping, carrying a weapon half-dragged behind her. The guards froze. No alarm sounded. No warnings issued. Mira Solas had returned, covered in dirt, burns, and blood that wasn't hers. She didn't speak. She didn't salute. She walked past him like a ghost who'd earned her place among the living. In the mess hall, laughter died as the door hissed open. Mira entered, dragging silence with her. Cadets stopped mid-bite. Forks paused midair. She crossed the room and sat at her table. Alone, as before. But this time no one mocked. No one dared. Kaoru rose slowly and approached, placing a tray beside hers. "They said you were dead," he said. Mira looked at him, eyes tired but sharp. "They weren't wrong," she replied. "Part of me didn't make it back." Around them, murmurs began again. Not insults, questions. Awe. A single name whispered louder than the rest. Death Maiden. Cometh watched her re-entry from the command deck, eyes narrowed. She just walked in, an aide asked. Unaided. No escort. Cometh nodded. No hero's welcome. No dramatics. That's how you know it's real. He stepped away from the console, prepped the next phase of training, and assigned her to Unit 0. The aide hesitated. "Unit 0? That's not protocol." Cometh replied without turning. "Neither is she." He knew she wouldn't speak of what she saw or what she'd done, but the battlefield spoke for her, and Cometh wasn't about to waste a weapon shaped by fire and silence. Later, Mira sat in the medical bay, stitched and bandaged by drones. A medic drone asked if she wanted sedation. She declined. Pain reminded her she was still alive. As the procedure finished, she stared at the ceiling. Voices echoed outside, officers discussing commendations, promotions, and propaganda. She closed her eyes. They didn't get it. This wasn't about glory. She hadn't survived to be a symbol. She'd survived because dying would have been too easy. The real war wasn't against the enemy. It was against being forgotten, dismissed, erased. And that war she had just begun to win. The next morning, Mira stood on the edge of the training yard as a new batch of recruits arrived. They were younger, louder, confident in their species' superiority. Mira watched in silence. A few noticed her and snickered. Another human? Thought they died out. One joked. Another pointed. That her? Doesn't look like much. Mira didn't react. She didn't need to. Cometh approached the new group, eyes scanning them like prey. You'll be trained under the command of Unit 0, he barked. And your supervisor, he turned. Mira stepped forward. Full uniform, scars visible. Is the Death Maiden. Gasps rippled through the recruits. One dropped his bag. Another stepped back. Mira stood unmoving, eyes cold as iron. Kaoru smirked from the sidelines. Cometh didn't speak further. He didn't need to. Mira's presence said everything. She hadn't returned for celebration. She returned to teach others a lesson she had carved into the soil with sweat and blood. Underestimation is a weapon, and survival is an art. The battlefield didn't just recognize her, it obeyed her. And now, so would they. The girl they once mocked had become a standard, and the name that once ridiculed her had become command. The nickname spread faster than any official report. First it was whispered in the mess hall, then it echoed in training drills. By the end of the week, Death Maiden was being used in formal briefings by officers too proud to admit fear and too awestruck to deny respect. Mira never claimed the name. She never even acknowledged it, but the silence only made it louder. Cometh reviewed an internal memo labeled Death Maiden, Threat Assessment Level Alpha. He snorted. So they've classified her now. But he didn't delete it. He just closed the file and stared at the wall, calculating. In a secure meeting with upper brass of the Rada Galactixna, Mira's footage was displayed without commentary. The room full of alien generals, diplomats, and tacticians watched the raw feeds, her movements, decisions, executions. No narration, just war. When the final clip ended, silence held the room. Then a gravelly voice broke it. She's not just a soldier. She's a message. Others nodded. The debate began not about her survival, but about her use. Propaganda, diplomacy, fear. She had become too much to ignore, too dangerous to dismiss. The discussion turned quickly from what is she to how do we use her. Mira, unaware of the closed-door talks, kept a routine. She trained. She studied. She watched. But something inside her had shifted. She felt eyes on her, eyes she couldn't see. Orders came more frequently. Requests for interviews, holographic recordings, appearance in recruit ceremonies. She refused them all. The base's PR division grew frustrated. She's hurting morale by being silent, one said. Cometh responded flatly. She's raising it by existing. Mira's refusal to play the hero turned her into one. The image of the quiet, bloodied cadet who came back alone was worth more than any speech. That silence, however, made others nervous. The higher she rose in the unspoken hierarchy, the more political pressure surrounded her. Officers began calling for psychological assessments. Others requested reassignment. One senator from the galactic interior warned, "This is how martyrs are born, and martyrs become revolutions." Cometh knew this well. He'd seen legends destabilize systems before. But Mira wasn't preaching. She wasn't leading rallies. She was just surviving, relentlessly, unapologetically. And that terrified more people than any flag ever could. The battlefield had forged her. But the legend? That was being built by those trying to contain her. Meanwhile, Kaoru kept close but distant. He knew something was shifting in Mira. Not outwardly. Her posture, tone, and behavior stayed sharp. But beneath, something stirred. She rarely slept. She trained at hours when others were unconscious. Once, he found her staring at a star map, marking systems in silence. "Planning your next war?" he asked. "No," she said. "Planning where they'll send me." He didn't know if she sounded afraid or ready. Perhaps both. He offered no comfort, just presence. He understood that the battlefield had made her, but the aftermath, that was remaking her again. Then came the official announcement. Mira Solas was being reassigned to Special Tactics Command under elite authorization. The orders came from above Cometh, signed in glowing glyphs of the Rada's council. She would be transferred to Orbit Command within 48 hours. When she received the file, she didn't speak. She simply closed the tablet and returned to her drills. Cometh called her in that night. "You're being turned into a flag," he said. "They'll polish your story until you forget what actually happened." Mira replied, "Then I'll remind them." Her voice was even, No fire, just fact. And Cometh, for once, respected it. That same night, Mira walked the outer perimeter, past the cannons and beacons that lit the cliffside. She paused at the ridge where she once fought alone. The wind howled across the jagged rocks. Below, nothing moved, but she imagined shadows where there were none. Her memories didn't replay chronologically. They flashed in fragments, a scream, a barrel, the silence after. Her hand brushed the scar on her shoulder. They wanted to make her a symbol, but she was something more dangerous than that. She was real, and real things can't be controlled. They can only be respected or feared. The following morning, the barracks awoke to the sound of something foreign. Applause. Mira entered the mess hall, not as a ghost, but as a presence. Cadets stood. Some saluted. Others simply nodded. Not because they were told to, because they had seen the footage, because they'd heard the stories, because they knew. She said nothing. Took her tray. Saturday. Kaoru sat beside her, eyes forward. "So, Commander?" he asked with a small smile. Mira shook her head. No, just someone who refused to die. But even that, now, was enough to command the room. 2 days after the reassignment order, Mira was summoned to a transport hangar under escort. The shuttle wasn't like the others, sleek, black, marked with no symbols. Silent, waiting. Inside, a single figure greeted her. Admiral Vorin of the Rada's Inner Intelligence Division. He studied her without blinking. "We've been watching," he said. "You've proven yourself capable of more than mere survival." Mira stayed silent. He continued. "We need you for missions others cannot survive. Precision, discretion, and silence." He handed her a classified dossier. "You'd strike before wars begin. You'd end them before they're declared." His voice lowered. "You'd be invisible." Mira opened the file. Target systems. Hidden operations. Civilian risk levels noted but dismissed. The language was clear. Surgical interventions with political deniability. She closed it slowly. "You don't want a soldier," she said. "You want a ghost." Vorin smirked. "A ghost that wears human skin. Your name frightens more commanders than enemy fleets." Mira stared at him. "You want to sell a myth to control the real." He didn't deny it. And myths obey better than people. For the first time since returning from battle, Mira felt something colder than war pressing against her. Manipulation. The kind that leaves no scars but rots everything inside. Back at base, Kaoru waited. Mira returned without speaking. She sat across from him in the empty mess and finally whispered, "They want to erase me. Keep the name, discard the soul." Kaoru listened, eyes glowing faintly. "Then why not run?" She looked at him sharply. "Because they'd hunt me. And worse, they'd replace me." That was her deepest fear. Not death, but distortion. Becoming something unrecognizable. A weapon without memory. A name without truth. Kaoru reached across the table, placing 2 fingers on her wrist. "Then you choose. You decide what the name means." Mira stared at the table. "Do I still have a choice?" Later that night, she stood before Cometh again. He poured 2 glasses of dark liquid, one for each of them. She didn't drink. "They want me to vanish in plain sight," she said. "Use me as a whisper, a warning, a shadow." Cometh nodded slowly. "They always do with legends." Mira leaned forward. "I'm not a legend. I'm a soldier." Cometh raised his glass. "Then act like one. Pick your battles. Decide your terms. Or they'll do it for you." The words weren't advice. They were truth born of years Mira hadn't lived yet, and they resonated like gunfire in her chest. The next morning, she reported not to the shuttle, but to the training yard. Recruits stood in formation. Officers frowned. The shuttle remained cold and silent. Mira stepped onto the platform and addressed the group for the first time. "I was ordered to disappear, to become a name without a face. I chose to stay. I chose to lead." The cadets exchanged stunned glances. Mira continued, voice steady. "The war made me, but I'm not its tool. I'm its proof that we survive, that we resist, that we return." It wasn't poetry. It wasn't politics. It was defiance carved into words. Word of her speech spread like fire through the system. Voran issued a formal reprimand, but Comet blocked it with a single line. Unit 0 remains under base command. No explanation. No debate. The Rada Council was displeased, but they didn't push further. Not yet. Mira had made her choice. She wasn't above war, but she would no longer be beneath command. She would fight, but not for agendas she didn't shape. That act, refusing a role designed to erase her, was more dangerous than any battle, and more inspiring than any victory. Among the recruits, her legend changed again. Now, she wasn't just a Death Maiden. She was Commander Mira. Training resumed with new fire. Mira began shaping Unit 0 with brutal honesty and personal example. She led every drill, took every hit, corrected every mistake. The unit bled, sweat, and broke together. And from that chaos, cohesion emerged. Mira wasn't charismatic. She didn't give speeches. But when she walked the field, others stood straighter. When she fought, they followed. Kaoru described it best. She doesn't lead from above. She pulls you from the mud beside her. That was the kind of leadership no hologram could fake, and the kind that no Rada official could replicate. One night, Mira found herself alone in the command chamber, reviewing footage of her first battle again. The angles, the hesitations, the screams. She paused at the frame where she first aimed her weapon. Young, terrified, determined, that version of herself was gone, but not forgotten. She touched the screen. "You got me here," she murmured, "but I'll get us through what's next." Her reflection shimmered. Her armor bore new stripes. Her shoulders, heavier, but her eyes, they still burned. No longer with desperation, but with direction. The abyss had offered its hand, and she'd spit in it. 3 weeks after a public defiance, a distress signal reached Sandwalker 4. An Allied outpost in orbit over the Veil Cradle system was under siege by an unknown fleet. The Rada scrambled forces, but couldn't decide which faction would command the response. Mira stood in the war room with Cometh, Kaoru at her side. "They'll wait too long," she said. "They always do." Cometh studied the screen. "Then act now. Take Unit 0. But this time the Council watches." Mira nodded once. She didn't need permission to lead. She only needed the field. When Unit 0 landed on Veil Cradle's moonside base, what they found wasn't just a siege, it was a slaughter. The defenders had fallen. The enemy had fortified the ruins, using anti-air shields and disrupting orbital scans. A traditional assault would be suicide. Mira stood before her team in the dust-choked twilight. "We don't take this like soldiers," she said. "We take it like survivors." Her plan: infiltrate the wreckage, use collapsed tunnels for approach, disable their defense grid manually. No aerial support, no reinforcements. Just Unit 0 against an entrenched enemy. And time? Running out. While others would have stormed the gates, Mira led her unit underground. Her knowledge of field terrain and psychological pressure gave her an edge. They moved in silence, guided by her intuition and makeshift map. At one choke point, she halted them, sensing a trap. She rerouted through a flooded tunnel instead, saving 3 lives. "How did you know?" a recruit whispered. Mira's answer was simple. "Because they think we'll act like them. We don't." That was her advantage. Mira didn't think like a general. She thought like the hunted who turned hunter. And the enemy wasn't ready for that. The deeper they went, the more the unit trusted her, without question. Every command was followed instantly. Every risk taken felt calculated. When they reached the control core, they found the enemy commander waiting, flanked by drones. "So this is the Death Maiden," he said mockingly. Mira didn't answer. She raised her rifle and fired not at him, but at the ceiling. The blast collapsed the support beam above, crushing half the drones and causing the others to malfunction. Chaos ensued. Mira didn't chase. She led her unit straight to the override terminal. The grid fell, and with it, the illusion of the enemy's superiority. Orbit Command watched in disbelief as the shield collapsed. Their scans showed Unit 0 moving to the compound like shadow through flame. Swift, coordinated, unstoppable. The council demanded answers. Who trained these tactics? Who authorized this formation? Comet replied without flinching. She did, and she didn't ask. On the field, Mira pushed forward, not for glory, but to finish what others abandoned. Her final move, detonating a buried reactor to collapse the enemy's escape route. Cut off retreat entirely. Unit 0 secured the base. 0 casualties. 1 hour. No speech. Just results. When the mission ended, Mira declined extraction once again. She walked the ruins alone, collecting fallen dog tags. She placed each into a container, with ritual care. Not because someone told her to, but because someone had to. Kaoru found her hours later, sitting beneath a broken statue. "The council's rewriting your story already," he said. Mira didn't look up. "Let them. I know the real one." He sat beside her. "Then what now?" She replied, "We train. We wait. We watch. And when they forget what war really is, we remind them." She was no longer just Death Maiden. She was a keeper of memory. Back on Sandwalker 4, Mira stood before the next wave of cadets. She didn't speak about victories. She spoke about survival, about sacrifice. "You'll be told what to fight for," she said, "but only you can decide who you are after the battle ends." Comet watched from the edge of the yard, arms crossed. For once, no correction came from him. No barked order. Just stillness. Respect. Mira didn't need titles. Didn't need promotions. What she had now couldn't be assigned. It had been earned. Through failure. Through fire. Through the silence that came after every scream. Word spread of what happened at Veil Cradle. Other commanders began requesting Mira's tactics. Others sent their recruits to observe Unit 0. The Death Maiden became more than legend. She became methodology, a shift in how war was taught. Not through domination, but through adaptation. Not with flags and horns, but with patience, resolve, and instinct. Mira never sat at the council's table. But every decision they made now considered what she might do. She had changed the war without changing herself. And that, in the end, was the greatest strategy of all. The atmosphere on Sandwalker 4 had shifted. No longer a place of dismissal for new species. The base now carried a different energy, one forged in the memory of a cadet who refused to disappear. Mira stood alone at the top of the observation tower as a new transport docked. From that height, the dust clouds that had once blinded her now danced gently across the horizon. She remembered arriving here, mocked, dismissed, barely considered alive by Sandwalker standards. And yet, every footstep she had taken had carved a path so deep that even the Rada Council couldn't bury it. In the main hall, a fresh intake of recruits lined up, posture stiff, curiosity hiding beneath discipline. A hologram of the battlefield at Veil Cradle played silently in the background. One by one, the rookies were processed, issued gear, and assigned quarters. Rumors already circulated. "She's still here," one whispered. "They say she never leaves base." Another asked, "Is she really human?" A third replied, "Does it matter?" They had never met her, but they had heard. And in war, stories walk ahead of the living. Mira's had walked so far that even she couldn't outrun it now. Comet stood outside her quarters, holding a sealed envelope. No insignias. No name. Just a code. He knocked once and entered. "Command offer," he said, placing on her desk. Mira didn't look up from her maintenance work. Not interested. Comet raised an eyebrow. No ceremony, no sarcasm. Mira tightened the bolt on her sidearm. "If I wanted to sit in a chair and watch others die, I wouldn't have survived all this." Comet didn't argue. He simply nodded. "You were never meant to be cadet. You were always something else. Something they'll keep trying to find." Mira answered, "Let them try." Later that week, she walked through the training yard. Recruits paused and stepped aside instinctively. Not out of fear, but out of calibration. Mira represented a standard now, not a mystery. She spotted Kaoru instructing a small group using one of her maneuvers from Veil Cradle. He noticed her and nodded without a word. No rank, no title, just acknowledgement. Mira kept walking, her eyes catching glimpses of herself in armor panels, reflected across years of fire. She no longer flinched. She no longer searched for proof. She didn't need to become anyone else. She had already become herself. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Mira sat near the edge of the old training cliff, the same spot where she once doubted if she belonged. The wind carried the distant hum of drills. Sparring sessions shouted orders. She closed her eyes. Her hands were calloused, scarred, steady. Her body still carried the weight of every survival. And yet, for the first time, her mind was still. She wasn't waiting for the next battle. She was simply existing in the space she had earned. Her name echoed behind her. "Commander Solas?" a voice asked. Mira opened her eyes, calm. "Not now," she said. "Just Mira." A young Ederiano, recruit, approached her hesitantly. "Is it true that you killed 32 without a squad?" Mira turned, studying his anxious posture. "I survived," she replied. "The numbers don't matter. What matters is why you stay standing." The recruit blinked. "Why did you?" Mira stood, brushing dust from her gloves. "Because I refuse to let someone else write my story." The recruit nodded, unsure if he understood. But Mira knew the lesson would settle later. Survival wasn't just physical. It was narrative, and hers belonged to no one else. The stars emerged above Sandwalker 4, and Mira stood facing them. She recalled every decision. The ones that bled, the ones that healed, the ones that nearly shattered her. Each had sculpted the armor she now wore, invisible to most but indestructible within. No council could erase it. No propaganda could twist it. And no fear could dismantle it. In the silence, she whispered to the sky, not in prayer but in declaration, "I'm not Cadet anymore." Behind her, the base stood firm. Before her, the galaxy waited. Mira stepped away from the edge, not down but forward, in the control tower. Cometh watched her cross the courtyard. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply whispered to himself, "Now, they'll have to build the war around her." Mira disappeared into the barracks as the first light of morning broke through the haze. Somewhere, systems turned, battles brewed, and politics twisted. But here, in this moment, the war paused. For breath, for memory, for a woman who had once been underestimated and now could not be ignored. If this story struck something deep in you, if Mira's defiance, survival, and silent strength echoed with your own battles, then you belong here. Subscribe to our channel for more human frontier tales that shatter expectations and forge legends from the ashes. Like, comment, and share this episode to keep the Death Maiden's legacy alive. Become a member to support the creation of more immersive and epic HFY stories, and help us keep telling what others try to silence. More stories like this are coming. Don't miss the next revelation.